Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the United Nations, the United States, and Jerusalem. The United Nations was established as an institution that would provide certain essential services to needy people all over the world. Today, that institution is fraught with problems, votes, resolutions, and the general going on of the General Assembly are classic examples of what is wrong with the United Nations. There are 193 member nations and 2 permanent observers in the United Nations General Assembly. Of all those many nations, only about 15 are real democracies. And another 55, 60, if you really stretch the definition, can be considered flawed democracies. The math is as simple as it is scary. The majority of the member nations in the United Nations are authoritarian, autocratic regimes that include monarchies and dictatorships. There are democracy indexes that actually track these issues. The venerated United Nations has become a bastion of anti-Israel and anti-US sentiment. And because it is the United Nations, that hatred is given a certain amount of credibility, oftentimes dressed up in the guise of justice. The decision by the General Assembly to vote to reject the U.S. decision supporting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is a direct attack against the United States. It has little to do with Israel and its capital, and almost everything to do with the United States weighing in and siding with Israel. The United Nations General Assembly allows countries without clout to have an equal voice with members with much power. The GA gives voice to oppressive regimes. Israel has the right to determine its capital, and the United States has the right to decide where to put its embassy or whether or not to recognize a country's capital. Had the discussion been about any other country's capital, it would have been a blip on the news cycle. Because it is about the hot-button issue called Jerusalem, Israel, the discussion has been exaggerated exponentially and reached global proportions. The United States is correct to be insulted. It is understandable that one of the greatest nations in the world, and by far the largest supporters of the United Nations, wanted to, quote, take names, unquote, in a vote against her. There is no reason for the United States to support countries that choose to publicly teach the United States a lesson. As President Donald Trump said at his cabinet meeting on Wednesday, the Wednesday before the vote, the last cabinet meeting of 2017, this is what he said, and I'm quoting here. For all these nations, they take our money and then vote against us. We're watching those votes. Let them vote against us. We'll save a lot. We don't care, unquote. When U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley said that the United States will, quote, be taking names, unquote, in essence, she was saying that there are consequences to decisions. She was pointing out that one need not agree or like what the United States does, but one cannot expect to publicly berate the United States for its policies and continue to expect to receive their money and support. Critics of the United States often call her patronizing. Well, yes, that's the point. The U.S. is a patron of the United Nations and many of the countries voting on resolutions that pass through the General Assembly. Patrons provide money and support. The word in Latin and the word in English share the same etymology, patra, or father. The United States is a patron, a father figure, a supporter, and a donor. The United States is acting the part. So is Saudi Arabia. The Saudis summoned Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, to Riyadh. They didn't ask him to come, they summoned him to come, and he speedily did. Once in Riyadh, the Saudis gave the Palestinian leader guidance. The Saudi Arabians, as well as Israel, have determined that Abbas has thrown out the playbook for peace and is walking away from the designated rules of interaction and using President Trump's declaration on Jerusalem as his excuse. The Saudis are not happy. They are pressuring Abbas to come back to the fold and play by the rules. The Palestinian Authority and all those other nations who think they can get support elsewhere are mistaken. In 2015, under the Obama administration, the U.S. gave the PA nearly $1 billion in aid. It came in the form of the standard $300 million that they always receive, plus USAID development aid, anti-narcotics aid, educational aid, police training aid, and more. That's a lot of money. The other nations promise aid, but few even partially follow through. And when they do, they rarely pay on time. The U.S. delivers their pledges, and they deliver on time. When the United Nations was created, real strength was given to the Security Council and its 5 permanent members. Lucky for the world, that still holds true. The General Assembly is a feel-good assembly. It has no power, and the resolutions it passes have no authority. When a majority of autocratic dictatorships and monarchies vote, they will always band together against democracies like the United States and Israel. Listen, this is important. The United States and Jerusalem were not trounced by the vote that took place in the United Nations General Assembly denouncing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. People are looking at the wrong numbers. 128 nations voted for the resolution condemning the United States and Jerusalem. 9 voted against, 35 abstained, 21 were no-shows. Of all these numbers, 128 is not the most important number. Not at all in the equation. The number we need to concentrate on is 65. 9 plus 35 plus 21 equals 65. 9 nations had the diplomatic guts to stand up to the rest of the world and unabashedly side with the United States and Jerusalem. It doesn't matter that, for the most part, they're small countries with small populations. They're countries and island nations that most people could not find on the map. But in the United Nations General Assembly, every nation gets an equal vote. Micronesia might only have a population of 161,000. Nauru, a population of 11,000. Palau, 20,000. And the Marshall Islands, 53,000. But their votes are equal to the votes of the most populated countries in the world. Of the 193 countries represented in the UN, tiny countries with 11,000 people get the same vote as China and India, who have over 1 billion residents. Such is the General Assembly. 35 nations had the wherewithal to abstain. That wasn't easy either. As for the 21 no-shows, they all calculated decisions. They decided not to attend. No country just takes a sick day from the GA. These countries did not want to offend the United States and wanted to continue to protect their own interest vis-a-vis U.S. aid. That's significant. The U.S. recognizes their decision and appreciates their diplomatic integrity. And that is why the United States paid tribute to those 64 countries, thanking them for their friendship by inviting them to the United States New Year's party. The wording on the announcement heralding the invitation extended by the United States ambassador to the United Nations was very important. This is how it read. The Honorable Nikki Haley, Permanent Representative, United States Mission to the United Nations, invites you to a reception to thank you for your friendship to the United States, Wednesday, January 3rd, 2018, 6 to 8 p.m., formal invitation to follow. The majority of nations represented in the United Nations are non-democracies. It should come as no surprise that when democratic issues are promoted by the United States and Israel, when they come up for a vote, they will fail in the glass building on Turtle Bay, as the United Nations is called. This vote on Jerusalem was certainly no exception. What was disappointing is that certain nations themselves, democracies, failed to vote alongside the United States. Each for their own reasons, countries like Great Britain, Germany, France, India, bailed when it came to the vote. Here are some other important numbers. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has only 57 members. No one could have expected those nations to vote in favor of anything having to do with Israel. Some of those countries, specifically Jordan and Egypt, will pay the price for their vote, but not a monetary vote, not a monetary price. The United States will not penalize them by denying them aid. They were saving face and voting along with their bloc. Now, the U.S. will engage in some backdoor arm twisting and have Egypt and Jordan act as unofficial silent U.S. proxies in issues pertaining to Palestinian-Israeli peace. While they weren't invited to the Nikki Haley New Year's bash, the U.S. support on Jerusalem just went up by 2, bringing it now to a total of 67. With this vote, especially the abstentions and no votes, the U.S. and Jerusalem succeeded in garnering 1/3 of the United Nations votes. That's significant. They did far better in the General Assembly than they did in the 15-member Security Council vote, where the United States stood tall and proud, but totally alone. The General Assembly has always been a release valve for angry anti-Western sentiments. It was a place where nations were able to save face and blow off steam. Many nations took advantage of the opportunity by taking what they thought to be a meaningless stance and vote against the United States. They thought they would be safe because the General Assembly resolutions have no teeth. Resolutions have no impact, and there is safety in numbers. They were wrong. By now, more than a year into his presidency, those countries should have known that President Donald Trump would take umbrage. The world leaders who chose to vote against the United States should have seen the writing on the wall and known that the United States would be offended. The United States of America, especially under President Trump, does not like to be humiliated in public. And to be humiliated by recipients of massive U.S. dollars was unacceptable. Not receiving an invitation to the party is, for them, just the tip of the iceberg. In the end, the vote went very well for the United States and for Jerusalem. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. Just one piece in today's section. It's a speech by U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley. It was picked up and published across the board on websites and newspapers around the world. It was delivered on December 21st, 2017. Her speech was truly inspirational. She's defending the honor of the United States and Jerusalem. Just as a reminder, the United Nations General Assembly vote was to condemn the United States' decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The speech is very short and worth hearing in its entirety.
To its shame, the United Nations has long been a hostile place for the state of Israel. Both the current and the previous Secretary Generals have objected to the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel. It's a wrong that undermines the credibility of this institution, and that in turn is harmful for the entire world. I've often wondered why, in the face of such hostility, Israel has chosen to remain a member of this body. And then I remember that Israel has chosen to remain in this institution because it's important to stand up for yourself. Israel must stand up for its own survival as a nation, but it also stands up for the ideals of freedom and human dignity that the United Nations is supposed to be about. Standing here today, being forced to defend sovereignty and the integrity of my country, the United States of America, many of the same thoughts have come to mind. The United States is by far the single largest contributor to the United Nations and its agencies. We do this in part in order to advance our values and our interests. When that happens, our participation in the UN produces great good for the world. Together, we feed, clothe, and educate desperate people. We nurture and sustain fragile peace in conflict areas throughout the world. And we hold outlaw regimes accountable. We do this because it represents who we are. It is our American way. But we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. When a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. Unlike in some UN member countries, the United States government is answerable to its people. As such, we have an obligation to acknowledge when our political and financial capital is being poorly spent. We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways. Those are the thoughts that come to mind when we consider the resolution before us today. the arguments about the President's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem have already been made. They are by now well known. The decision was in accordance to U.S. law dating back to 1995, and its position has been repeatedly endorsed by the American people ever since. The decision does not prejudge any final status issues, including Jerusalem's boundaries. The decision does not preclude a two-state solution if the parties agree to that. The decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, the President's decision reflects the will of the American people and our right as a nation to choose the location of our embassy. There is no need to describe it further. Instead, there is a larger point to make. The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered. Thank you.
Nikki Haley's speech is so profound. She articulates exactly what is important to the United States and to Israel and puts perspective on the United Nations General Assembly. She explains that the UN is clearly biased against Israel. And she says that, simply put, it's wrong, and that the U.S. will not stand by and let that go without responding. She also said that those trying to embarrass the United States in public will be remembered. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 4 cartoons today, actually 2 cartoons and 2 picked tunes. The first 2 are by Michael Ramirez. The first was published on December 29, 2017. An old camper trailer sits in the middle of nowhere. It's sitting on a cinder block. A tattered ISIS flag is flying from the top. In front is an ISIS fighter sitting on the cinder block, cooking a hot dog on a stick on a tiny flame. Under the cartoon reads ISIS Caliphate. Enough said. It's all done for ISIS. The second cartoon is also by Michael Ramirez and was published on December 23, 2017. The cartoon has 2 frames. On the left is a Hamas terrorist, and his shirt reads, "Wipe out Israel." Under the frame is the caption, "Before the Jerusalem recognition." The next frame is the same Hamas terrorist, just like in the first. His shirt reads, "Wipe out Israel." And this time, the caption underneath reads, "After the Jerusalem recognition." The next 2 images are pictoons, pictures with a caption. Both of these pictoons come from IsraeliCool.com. The first pictoon is 2 Palestinian stone throwers talking. One says to the other, "Are you sure today is a day of rage? I thought it was the day of mild annoyance." The last image is also from IsraeliCool.com. It's a calendar. Each day is listed as a special day. It makes fun of the day of rage. One day is a day of rage, another is a day of anger, a day of outrage, violence, pique, fury, hatred, hissy fit, enmity, a day of vexation, a day of wrath, etc. You name it, it's on the calendar. Even a day of secretary appreciation. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Russia and Turkey have come to an agreement. Russia will provide Turkey with 4 S-400 surface-to-air missile systems. The missile batteries will cost Turkey $2.5 billion. They will be delivered in 2020. Up front, Turkey will have to pay 45% of the cost. The other 55% will be a loan repaid to Russia over time. The West is not happy with this arms deal. The S-400 is not on the NATO weapons list, and so it does not fit into the NATO system. Turkey is a member of NATO, And the weapons lists are there in order to provide smooth transitions and understanding between nations. Turkey is the first NATO nation to acquire the S-400. This might be a game shifter. The S-400 is Russia's most highly developed surface-to-air missile system. The Duma is the Russian parliament. Recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin submitted a resolution to the Duma, and it passed hands down. The Duma extended the Russian lease on their naval base in Syria for another 49 years. The ramifications of that resolution are far-reaching. Russia will be permitted to remain in Syria as a military force for decades to come. The resolution even enumerated the types of vessels that could be in the port. It permits nuclear-powered ships and subs. The agreement was hammered out between President Putin and Syrian President Assad. In the end, it just needed to be ratified by the Duma. All this is important, but even more importantly, this agreement shows that Putin, and by extension Russia, believe the person who makes decisions for the present and the future in Syria is Assad, and that it seems that Putin agrees wholeheartedly. If you criticize Palestinian President Abbas or his government, you could get arrested. If you are a public person who commands a following, your arrest is even more likely. Mohammed al-Daya, a retired brigadier general in the Palestinian National Security Services, was arrested for his critique of Abbas. Not only was he a general, al-Daya was also Yasser Arafat's personal security guard. Arafat went everywhere with al-Daya. The al-Daya family was stunned by the arrest and issued the following statement. "We were surprised by the unfair and illegal arrest of our militant son, Brigadier General Mohammed al-Daya, by the Palestinian Military Intelligence Service 4 days ago," unquote. There are serious doubts about whether the Palestinian Authority is a democracy. This arrest, once again, proves that personal rights and democracy are not a foundation of the PA. A massive rift is emerging in Gaza, and it has nothing to do with politics. The rift is over morning prayers. The Muslims pray 5 times a day. The first prayer is said at dawn. It's called Fajr, and it means the dawn. A committee of religious leaders thinks that the Fajr has not been well attended and have decided to start a Gaza-wide campaign to change the situation. They are waking up all of Gaza for dawn prayers. For the daily wake-up call, they're not only using the loudspeakers from the mosque that is traditionally done, but they are making them even louder, and they're adding drums to the call of prayer. There's been serious blowback, even from several Islamic scholars who say that it's against Islamic law to annoy people. Abdul Bari Kela, a mufti and an imam, and a very influential scholar of Islam, explained that while Fajr is very important, so is protecting people's sleep and not annoying them. And this intrusion into their daily lives could backfire. He said, and I'm quoting here, "The banging will awaken children and it will cause confusion." Kela issued an Islamic ruling about the importance of prayer and going to the mosque at dawn. But he also added and said this: it's against Islam's instructions to annoy people. He said that there are 2 traditional calls to prayer, and they're called azan. And they are issued from the mosque. They're delivered according to the instruction of Islam, and they are not to be added to, and they are not to disturb people. He wrote this: replacing them with illegitimate means such as drums, music, and loud sound that makes noise is illegal. If it leads to harm, like annoying people or disturbing them, this is forbidden. Filling the mosques at dawn is now a policy of the government. The Ministry of Religious Affairs in Gaza has chosen to become involved and is sponsoring the early wake-up. So it has become political. More people will be coming to dawn prayers, but the inevitable outcome is that even more people will be angered. Iran has banned teaching English in elementary schools. The decision was made by the supreme leader, the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. Iranian leadership sees English as a springboard to assimilation and is an open invitation for Western culture to enter Iran. The response is to shut down what the Grand Ayatollah terms cultural invasion. Mehdi Navid Adam, speaking for the Ministry of Education, described the logic behind the policy of rejecting the teaching of English in Iran this way: teaching English in government and non-government primary schools in the official curriculum is against laws and regulations. Iranian leadership may be correct regarding cultural assimilation, but from the technological, scientific, medical vantage point, it will thrust Iran backwards. In as little as 15 years, Iranians will not be able to compete on the world stage in any science, computer, or technology-related field without English. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We've been talking a lot about the United Nations. It deserves some perspective. The UN emerged out of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was created in the aftermath of World War I as a result of the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles. It was established in January 10th, 1920, after the signing of the treaty. It had its first meeting 6 days later on January 16th. 6 days after the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, 44 nations signed the original covenant, and its peak was in 1935 with 58 members in the League of Nations. The objective in forming the League of Nations was that all conflict in the future would be resolved through dialogue and negotiations. The original ideas were lofty, and to try to prevent another world war. The UN replaced the League of Nations in 1945 with 50 member states. Today, there are 193 members with 2 observers, the PA and the Holy See. The mission of the United Nations is to promote international cooperation and to maintain international order. Today, the United Nations has many failings, but it also does tremendous good. It is heavily involved in helping countries in need of water technology, education, health education, fighting child mortality, and many others. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.